Guthrie,
Present.
Campbell,
Present.
Collins, Yossi. 3 present, number.
Thank you. There'll be a change to the agenda this evening. Mayor Bob Gallagher sounds like he came down with the flu, so him and Administrator Decker Palin will reschedule for the end of March, beginning of April. So we'll move on to number 4, old business, fiscal year 26 max tax levy and budget discussion. Nevada?
Thank you, Mayor. So for tonight's discussion, I sent out a memo regarding all of the budget updates. I think it was maybe the second week in February. So just going through those updates, I changed the tax levy for the budget to the 8.11 as requested by council. That increased the general fund budget by $49,844. I also took the $130,000 out of the general fund budget that was going to be transferred into our equipment replacement, and we took that $130,000 out of the Capital Streets Project Fund, which is a fund that's just been kind of sitting. We haven't used it in quite a few years, and so using those funds to pay for the field drag and the Deere 4x2 Gator. We also went through and redid the projections on some of those estimates for the fiscal year 25 estimates, as well as changing some of the initial budget numbers that had come through. I know the police department and the streets department and the vehicle maintenance department had wages that had just been projected off of previous numbers, but when we took a closer look at those, we got a more accurate projection. And that resulted in $90,000 additional available funds in the general fund. The general fund revenue line for the rents was increased by $7,500 since the initial proposal that you saw. It had not had the Scott County Library rent included in that, so we recalculated that $400 a month rent that we received from the library and increased that line by $7,500. In the PD budget, we added $6,000 to the budgeted expenses to include 2 additional flock cameras, also as requested by council. Wage increase, the original budget proposal had everything projected at 4% for all the wages. As we don't know what those increases are going to be right now, we are still in the process of negotiating. That was decreased to the 3.5%. That resulted in an increase of $9,902 available funds in the general fund after adjusting the wage lines, the IPERS, and the FICA lines for all of those applicable budget lines. In the road use budget, the purchase of the dump truck was adjusted by $50,000 to account for funds being contributed from the sewer department towards that purchase. The sewer department fund was adjusted accordingly. So all of the extra funding that became available after those adjustments were put into a contingency line in the general fund until further direction from council on that. Initial questions or thoughts on those adjustments?
That number 5 for the library rent. How many months was that? Because that's got to be more than 12 for 7,500 at 400 a month.
So I think we were looking at some of the tower rents weren't calculated. Correctly or accurately either. Okay. So after making that adjustment, the main part of that adjustment was including the Scott County Library rent, but also there was, I think, a half of year tower rent that wasn't. Okay. Because we get 50% of all that water tower rental
for the cell
funds
phones
that come in. Yep.
Okay.
With reducing the wage to 3.9%, I understand where you don't know where we're at. Should we look at reducing that more consistent with the CPI or cost of living, and then put the balance into that contingency fund.
Reducing the wage increase more?
Should we take it down to 2.5% 3%, because cost of living last year is 2.2 or 2.5%. I understand with contracts coming up, but if we have a contingency plan, another line item, it might give us a more realistic number. The other thing I've looked at, or would like to at least discuss, is you did take that 130,000 out of going to equipment replacement. I think we should try to put some in there, whether it's 100,000, 80,000, something to start building that fund back up, just for the mere reason, God forbid if we crashed a squad car, we really don't have a fund to pull that out of, other than sales option tax.
No matter how do we compare with wages with other cities in terms of where we're at? I'm not real comfortable reducing it that much, Brian. I think that sends a wrong message to our employees. I think it sends the message that they aren't very valuable.
I disagree with that 100%. I'm 180 from that. If you leave it up high, you're also setting the standard of what you're saying you're going to give them in contracts. What if that only comes out at 3%? Go to an arbitrator, and the arbitrator is going to say you put 3.5% in there. That's what you have to give them.
And you guys eyes on that? You guys don't loan me. You're the expert. I mean, I'm not being.
I don't call that low.
But if the cost of living is only what 2.2, you said?
2.2 or 2.5 last year.
And so you're just giving them a cost of living raise then, basically.
Not if you're at 2.5 or 3%.
Well, that's a very minimal increase.
Well, Scott, if you go through the history of it, we've always given them anywhere from 2.75 to 1 year 4%, when cost of living was a little lower. So it's not like they're behind. If you look at our salaries compared to the school district, it will shock you.
I'm not comparing. I'm curious about how we compare with other cities.
Maybe we should check in our own market, what's the school board looking at giving for increases? That's cost of living.
So we usually use comparables from other municipalities. It's a little bit different. It's public sector with like the school board, but it is a little bit different as far as the jobs. So we usually look at comparable cities in the state, in the region, and then comparable by size as well. We did quite a few adjustments last year for different groups of the employees, so we are on track in most of the areas. The one department that still has not been adjusted, I guess, to those comparable wages would be the police department officers. So there are some cities smaller than us that have more competitive wages and more competitive packages. But otherwise, I would say across the board, we are pretty much in line with what the other cities are doing. And again, that the 3.5, the 4% was the general average given by Iowa League of Cities at looking at everything across the state for the year. The 2024 inflation, I think, or cost of living or inflation increase was at around 2.9%. Just for reference on those.
Scott, with that, I could concede or agree upon 3% as a starting point. But the difference between 3% and 3.5% that we have in the budget, with the line item, contingency, worst case scenario for contracts. An arbitrator might come back and say we have to give them 4. Because an arbitrator picks one or the other. They don't hit the middle. In these other cities, we're talking about wages. Look at the benefits that we offer, that we co-pay with the employees' co-payment. I mean, it's all it's a pie. How do we want to cut it up? But we need to look at total value to our employees. We have some great employees. Do a good job. But back to the equipment replacement fund, I don't know how everybody feels on that, but I think we need to build some in there. Doesn't mean they'll end up staying there. Police department, I think we should transfer that amount out of their budget to the equipment replacement fund and buy the squad cars out of that fund. If that's what we finally elect to do. Dump truck, I don't know if we can do the equipment replacement. I would think so, but we're funding that with motor fuel tax. So kick that amount, plus the 50 grand that the sewer department's gonna put in over to that fund too. Because year after year, the 2 squad cars in the police department, when we look at their total expense, their total price to do the police department, you're gonna see a spike in it. It's buying two cars in 1 year. Or if we kick that over to the equipment replacement, you're gonna see the actual cost of running the police department.
So then one other question to that, and my numbers could be wrong, but if I add up everything that all the things you've done, my numbers are roughly that we've increased the general fund by about $275,000, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Some other things that we have to be aware of, the legislature, what they're gonna do to us. One bill that is out there currently is for sewer rates. Can't increase more than 2 years from the, well, they say it's gotta be within 102% of the previous year. If you have a project on the books before July 1st of 2025, you can raise your fees higher than that 2% to cover those expenses. But in the future, if you do that, it has to go to a vote of the people to go over that 2%. Another thing that's out there is there's a proposal which will probably pass, limiting how you can pay for lobbyists. We're part of that group involved in the arsenal to promote the Quad Cities. The bill out there right now makes it so you cannot fund the lobbyists with general revenue funds. So we may have to come up with a way, if that's what we want to do, how are we going to pay for that? There's a bunch of bills, unfortunately, like all budgets, we're trying to plan 18 months out. But I truly think the one with the sewer, because Des Moines is actually, trying to cut property taxes and everything else. I think the sewer capping it at a 2% increase over the previous year on our sewer rates will probably pass. I think the same with lobbyists will probably pass at the end of the day. So what do we pay, $7,500 into that fund?
To the arsenal.
I believe the council decided that this would be the last year for that, so the fiscal year invoice for this fiscal year was $7,500. And we didn't budget it in for fiscal year 26.
Okay.
For the sewer revenues for the next, I believe it's projected out 5 to 6 years for recommendations at this point. None of our years were below 2% in all of those years.
None were below 2%?
They were all below. We were not at 2% for any of those projections for the next 5 or 6 years.
Okay. But if we do an improvement down there and levy more money to do that, we do a vote of the people.
So for the sewer department though, if we're paying for a sewer project out of sewer funds, those would have to be raised off of their rates. We can't, you don't commingle the sewer funds and the general fund. So a cap on those rates wouldn't impact the general fund revenue.
No, but for the sewer funds, because the only way if we have a project we could fund that is up as sales option dollars, sales option tax dollars.
Yeah, so the revenue requirements for any projects that are on the books would be able to be covered by the rates that are set to perform operations for the sewer.
Anything else, guys?
No, the other thing that's coming around with the legislature too is, if it'll take the vote of the people, but be able to levy a tax to fund the libraries up to a certain amount. That certain amount is less than we're paying the library now, but we could take that and remove that from our GRF funds with the vote of the people.
So we're missing a couple of council members tonight, so it's kind of hard to have a discussion, you know, about the tax rate and anything else, but where do you see us going from here, Brian?
Well, the function of tonight is to set our max tax levy.
Right.
That's all it is.
But we can still have a discussion. I think it's important for what we're here. We should have a, we
Yeah.
can't just, we should talk about some of the things we have coming up, and I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Which subject?
Pick a subject, Brian.
Shoot, you want to talk about parks, you want to talk about streets, you want to talk about police?
I think we can probably talk about all those. I mean, you all saw the CIP discussions that they've had over the past whatever. You saw an updated one from the parks. The 279, I think we could find plenty of projects that could be funded by that 279.
279 is also, round numbers, 7% growth, 6% growth in our GRF.
I don't know what it would break down to as growth, but we wouldn't be capped by any of that. We're at our capped amount with what is in there. However, we adjust how we spend what's in there isn't going to be considered into our taxable growth.
But our general revenue fund increased by over $200,000 this year, or asking.
Yeah, that's the max asking that we can have on the combined general fund levy. That was set prior to any of these adjustments. We didn't bring in any additional property tax with these adjustments. We adjusted what was in our original budget and how we were spending those dollars and where we were spending them from, but it didn't change our property tax levy at all.
No, but it freed up money for the GRF, but our expenditure is still, over last year, over $200,000 more in the budget of the GRF than is proposed right now.
Can you, I don't think I followed. Our expenditures are 200,000 more?
By moving stuff away from the GRF to free up the GRF. That puts our spending almost $200,000 more in the GRF.
I think it just changes where we take or what projects we allocate to this year. As far as operating budget, it doesn't change that. Our expenditures for the operating budget would still be the same. But it does free up some more money to allocate to projects in this current year by adjusting where those monies are being spent.
I must not be explaining it correctly.
I understand. You both said the same thing different ways. The amount of revenue come in and what the general fund is the same. But by getting creative and looking at what was needed and playing the Red Solo Cup game, there's $275,000 extra that didn't come from additional sales tax or property tax, just by rearranging our priorities.
Well, it came from somewhere to begin with.
No, I understand that, but not extra revenue brand new for this fiscal year.
It's more we can spend in the GRF.
Right.
Yeah.
Currently unallocated, right?
Correct.
So,
Same amount of money, just different structure.
Pull from different buckets to have available to use where necessary. So that's what and this amounts to.
But I said earlier, you know, I think we still need to put 100,000 or 80,000 or something in equipment replacement fund out of GRF for the future. So that cuts down total expenditures by that amount because we're putting that in, dedicating that to savings for equipment replacement.
I trust you.
That's a large, yeah, that's a large amount too.
I mean, and, you know, I've taken a hit for being conservative. I have no problems in how I've been conservative. I've spent money when I thought we needed it, but I'm far from spending money just because we can.
I don't think anybody wants to do that, Brian. I think that we see projects that need to get done and need to address those or have discussions about those and then debate it out, you know, and everybody's here. I mean, I'm not for being frivolous with city funds whatsoever. But I think that there are issues out there that we need to address and talk about moving forward.
Don't disagree.
Yeah.
We need to start with the core functions of city government, then expand out to see what we can afford at that point. And there's some cases, just because we can afford it today, may not be the right reason to do it. You know, we have to look at our capital reserves, you know, maintaining that 25%, 30%. There's street projects that will come up. I just don't want to have, and Nevada's done a good job. She's got contingencies built in here in different places. But tonight, we're here to talk about the max levy, $8.11. Nevada's first budget proposed was $8.01. Just because we set the max levy at $8.11 doesn't mean we have to, at the end of the day, have our combined levy at $8.11.
Right.
And this is put together, spending all that $8.11.
Right.
I'm just saying there could be some areas in here we can trim a little bit and still do great service and amenities to our community and not be at that $8.11.
So Nevada, what is the timeline then? So we subtract the max levy, then what's the next steps here?
The deadline to submit our max levy proposal to the state is March 5th. We have our March 3rd committee of the whole meeting to discuss it, and by that end of that meeting, we'll need to know what our proposed max levy is going to be to the state so that the county can send out our proposed levy to the residents for our public hearing. So we'll have one more meeting after tonight.
Scott, that's one more regular scheduled meeting. Nothing prevents us from having a special meeting to dial down on this budget.
If necessary.
Nevada, do you know, did the PD ever get estimates back on price of the Dodge Ram pickups?
I don't believe they have the pickup truck estimates back yet that I'm aware of.
Scott, I will say we're getting close on the budget. How's that?
Go ahead, Adrian.
I know going through this and looking at it, and there's been previous discussion, which really hasn't gone far, but just last week, I believe it was last week already, that massive fire over the east side of town. And of course, we still have a volunteer fire department. There's a discussion before regarding Chief Strickloff and possibly getting one full-time person to help with the admin side of it. I think he might be somewhat taxed with his role as the head chief mechanic and his farming, what he does. And then and almost another full-time job in itself, being the chief of a fire department. We might want to look at some of those funds, as we look and we prioritize for safety purposes as we continue to grow. What can we possibly do or look at? Right now, it's probably somewhat late, but if we can maybe keep it on the forefront and see what possibly we can do, bring that up or have a special committee meeting. That doesn't have to be a committee as a whole, but I think maybe public safety, somebody needs to come together and see what we can do as we grow, so we can ensure things are being done properly. We're not taxing anybody within our fire department too.
Funny you should say that. I was at that fire, it was hot, totally different. One thing we could look at, if there's a way that we can come up with roughly $40,000. We're already giving the fire department $60,000 in the gas franchise fee. I think if we could find a way for around $40,000 and then sit down with them and say, we'll hire a chief. We can put him on the city books so he gets insurance. One more person on insurance isn't going to be a lot of money. But if you take $40,000 plus that 60, you have the wages probably to sustain a fire chief. So it's not like it's going to be a total 100,000. I mean, if we consider that path, the $1 million question is, will Chief or Keith, the current chief, want to take that position, and we'll be looking for a mechanic? Or do we look for somebody totally different? But, I mean, there's qualifications, what you have to set. Be nice to have somebody that's medically trained, somebody that has to be probably firefighter 1 at minimum, certified. But I think, to Adrian's point, I think there's a way to come up with money to fund a chief that's not going to break the bank.
And so is the fire department with their discussions on this subject, Brian?
This is the first time anybody has ever heard this discussion. The fire department is getting tired. They're running roughly 1,000 calls a year now, between responding to long growth calls when they don't answer. Mutually, the senior living facilities is probably another 100 to 150 calls a year minimum. Yeah, I think the fire department would be joyous if there's some way we could work that out. I can't speak for them. I'm not a voting member on the fire department.
When I first started here, I was tasked with putting some information together and gave a report to the city council at that time and made that available to the new members after they arrived. So that information was still out there. I received budgets from several different departments. We did meet with some of the officers a couple of times. Right now, on that subject, the ball is back in their court. We talked about a job description and developing it. So at this point, city staff is just waiting for them to reply with the revised job description. At that point, then we were gonna bring that forth and start conversations with city council on it.
Jeff, and I think that's right. I'm not saying we have to do it today or tomorrow,
Right.
but we need to keep progressing the discussions in a positive way, because at some point in time, it's going to happen. Unfortunately, if they get too worn out, right now we spend proposed budgets around $1.7 million for the police department. That's got, 11 employees? It's probably going to take that and probably 50 to 100% more of firemen. So we'd be looking at, roughly $4 to $5 million, $4 million anyways to run the fire department.
Yeah.
Right now, we don't have it in our budget, so it's something we're gonna have to work through, and with the state crunching down on us, that would definitely take a vote of the people.
Yeah, and the other communities in the report that I presented, Nevada, LeClaire, have, started with a paid person, a chief position, that handled administrative duties, but also was an acting participant, fire chief. And then they've since added, I think LeClaire, it's been a while since I discussed this with them, they might have added 2 more people now. Just one. I know they were in discussions about a second, adding a 3rd person, so that'll be their next step. But, so the other places that have done this didn't go whole hog and hire a full department of people. They've, kind of stepped it up, each year, to have the personnel as needed, which is something we look at. The fire department budgets for Eldridge and LeClaire and Nevada at the time I did the report were very similar in number. And the other 2 departments did have a paid person on staff. So, I don't know. I think, yeah, it is something we need to talk about, and I'm happy to have that discussion with them.
Well, LeClaire funded theirs through the wonderful traffic cameras out on Interstate 80.
I was told that bought some supplies and stuff, but it paid no salaries. They were using that for equipment, I believe, but, yep.
Well, it's a big picture. LeClaire owns the fire department.
Yeah.
We don't own the fire department. So there's a catch-22, there's some things to go through.
Yeah, that's part of the intricacies of all this is, talking to the insurance people involved, it's very difficult, for the city to hire just a paid personnel and not own the infrastructure there. It creates a lot of insurance issues that are unseen to us. So all that has to be looked at and part of this discussion. I mean, there's liability issues and there's insurance issues that are way, way over our heads on what we're talking about right now today that all have to be worked out.
But we can't work them out and try to find a solution to it if we don't start.
Sure, and I think at this point, I've been waiting for almost 6 months for a job description that I've offered several times to help them finish, which I think it'd take 20 minutes. So.
On that subject, so we can get back to the max levy, probably 1.5 years or 2 years ago, right before Nevada came, we had a meeting with, Tony was our administrator at the time, me, Dan Collins, the fire department, and Keith went to Bettendorf and talked to Decker and the mayor, their chief and assistant chief down there, and went over, I can't remember if it was 1976 or 1978. One of those 2 years was when they got their first paid firemen for Bettendorf. And since then, it's still a hybrid department, volunteers, partially paid. And I think it was like 22 or 23,000 was their population of Bettendorf when they actually did that first paid. So this has been an ongoing, evolving thing to get to where we are. And then I'll shift gears now. So back to where we're at on the levy, it's stuff like this. Someday, City Hall and Police Department, LeClaire Road's failing from Casey's to over by Cabo's, and there's a couple other places. A possible combined road project on South 5th Street with the school district, with possible 8 or 10 foot bike path there on the side of on the east side. With these are all other things that we have to plan for the future. So if we only do the minimum, we will never have the extra funds to do these other things that we already are on our radar. It's not really a wish list. LeClaire Roads will need replaced. South 5th needs repaired. The addition we did to the basement maxed out what we can do with our current City Hall and Police Department. The next step will be a bigger building. So none of these things that I'm mentioning are wish lists. They are needs to be replaced, and we have to start planning for the future.
I would totally agree, Frank. I mean, we need to be visionary, and I think I've told anybody that listens to me that the biggest thing I've learned in my year on the council is how slow moving everything is. I mean, it takes forever to get anything done, and so I think we need to start having serious discussions about that. We bought the land, which is awesome. I think we need to start thinking about putting a building out there, how soon we can do that, you know, so they can move some of their stuff out there. And then the next thing is definitely a city hall and a police department. I mean, it's a 2 or 3 phase thing, but we gotta get started on it. I mean, we can't kick that can down the road. I mean, look at our current city hall. I mean, there's not even room for another employee. If we wanted to have another employee, there's no place to put her in, just a hallway. And you talked about the police department, you know, and we put some money into that to remodel the basement, and which it looks nice, but it's probably not adequate. So I think we need to come up with a plan. Maybe that's part of the thing. We have our goal setting session, but I mean, we need to have some serious discussions about how we're gonna move forward on this. And I think the first thing is talking about the public work building out there on the new land and not waiting 4, 5, 6 years to get that done.
I agree.
Scott, what we need to do first on that down there is do a conceptual layout of how,
I think they have that already. I think.
So we had an approved proposal from ISG for the public facilities, which includes a layout for the public works facility on the new parcel that we purchased, as well as a layout for the city hall / PD. They do have those mock layouts that we've been working with the internal teams on, as far as what's needed for space, for employee growth, for all of that. They're getting ready to bring us a broad range cost for those facilities in that phased out approach that we talked about, so we can look at the reality of what planning that project might look like.
has any of the council members seen that?
Not at this point. It's not a point to be brought forward to council yet. We're still looking at space needs and layouts that fit the needs of what those departments would be, so we can get a realistic layout that comes with a broad cost to bring to the council for that next step in the proposal. Right now, we're in internal discussion stages before we have that ready to bring forward to a public meeting as a proposal.
So what would be the time frame then for that to get in front of us so we could have those discussions?
We should be able to bring something forward in March, probably maybe the second meeting in March. I don't know that it would be ready in 2 weeks. Probably getting down to our final staff level discussions with ISG before we bring that back to in front of the council for next steps. But I would say by the second meeting in March, we would be able to have that ready to bring forward to council for their review of what ISG has done so far and what their recommended next steps are.
That'd be a good first step. Maybe start those discussions and see what they have.
Well, I think it's a great first step, but unfortunately, we're the ones that have to go to taxpayers to get the money for that. Not to be involved in the process until it's already been decided, I don't think is a positive way to go.
I don't think it's decided. I think they're giving us a recommendation of what it might look like, is my understanding.
It's, Scott, and you're right, you haven't been around a long time. You give them a wish list, and they'll go for, we have great employees, but they'll go for as much as they can get. Where we may have to look at it, and I'm talking about conceptual layout of this building going here. We look at a building, first we need a building to get us out of the cap plan. I mean, we're paying almost $20,000 a year in rent.
Absolutely.
But do we build one to get us out of there and then some, or do we build one to last us for 20 years and build something else first? I mean, it's gonna be a well thought out process in order to cash flow.
And I think it still can be well thought out. I think this is just a starting point. I think we have to have a starting point, and they're giving us a starting point, and then they bring it to us, and then we have discussions at this level.
I understand that. Which I went through the process with a public works an employee, and then a utility department manager had it all planned out and says, here it is, here's the property we want to get. I'm not going to go that way again.
Well, hopefully we learn from our mistakes, if that was a mistake.
That was a mistake.
Well, then hopefully learn from it then.
I have. But no, it'd be good to see that so we can work towards that, but I think we need a conceptual drawing of how people envision it being laid out.
That's exactly what we're putting together, options of those conceptual drawings with that direction from council that you just stated. We've had those discussions before and what would need to happen in order for each of these steps to take place. And so we are putting together the base level for each of those phases with options to bring forward for the council to then give direction on how to move forward with what we've been able to create as realistic options that will fit the needs of each department, what they're currently lacking right now, what services are being hindered by the space that we have right now, the staffing levels, those things. Those are the discussions that are happening at the department head level to be able to talk operationally with the engineers about what each department does, and then bringing those options to the council to be able to give direction.
I mean, it's obvious going to be 5 years probably before we get something substantial to replace City Hall.
It will depend on project costs and what we find out about that.
Well, project costs and priority, what we want to build first. As far as our current City Hall, I disagree that we were full. We can take what we used to call the council chambers and turn that into cubicles. There's no reason that the other boards that meet at City Hall can't meet here just like this.
There is.
We talked about that, but then they'd have to accommodate that around events that are being scheduled here that they make money off of for every night that those board meetings would need to meet.
Yeah.
And it can be difficult trying to schedule even these meetings when we have an extra meeting. There's a lot of times we'll reach out and they're booked. That's why we had to have our council training at the library instead of here.
Yeah, and that was because we don't have a P&Z meeting every month. We don't have a Board of Adjustment meeting every month. And so do we tell them they just can't schedule anything in this room Thursday nights, or, I mean, how do we work?
Well, Board of Adjustment, Plan and Zone, we can be a little, right now we cater to everybody for their convenience, when we get people together.
Right.
Versus we could come out and say, Plan and Zoning's the third Thursday of the month, period.
Yeah, and we try to
We're very accommodating to people, but,
Correct.
if it's for a management of space, we may have to come out and say, this is the date the meeting's on. And then same with Board of Adjustment.
Yeah. But that'd be the type of decision that would have to be made in order to move it here and then make use of that space.
These are really great conversations, but we've got way off the base of the max tax levy. It's all these good discussions is why all the more reason we need to move forward at the 8.11 that's being recommended instead of 8.01.
I'm in full support of that.
I won't disagree with, we're setting a max levy. That's the maximum we can go, but once we get through all these discussions, doesn't mean we have to be at 811.
Once we submit it on the 5th to the state, that's what gets proposed for the public hearing, and so that's what would be put out to the residents that the council is planning on being the tax levy. So if we go with 8.11 that submits to the state on March 5th, that would be what we are proposing to the residents as our tax levy for fiscal year 26.
That's what we're proposing for max tax levy.
So the max doesn't, once we set our tax levy, there's no adjusting it. We don't ask for lower. That's what we submit to the state. That's the tax levy that we have proposed and adopted, and then we don't deviate from that. That's our tax levy for the fiscal year. We can't collect lower. If we submit to the state that our tax levy is 8.11, that's the levy that's the property taxes that the county and the state will give to us from the property taxes.
Once we set that, but we have to have a public hearing prior to us sending it to the state. We can lower it. We're just telling the county it's not going to be any more than this.
So the public hearing would be at the proposed thing that you send to the state, and then I suppose at the public hearing, if you decide to go with a different tax levy, then we would have to readjust the entire budget and have it turned into the state and adopted the full budget adopted by the council within those 2 weeks so that we submit the budget to the state on time.
So is that doable then, to have, do we need a special meeting, as you mentioned earlier, or can we get it all done on March 3rd?
We can get it all done and use funds, for example, going to the equipment replacement. If the tax levy is lower, to just not put as much in there to balance it out. So it's not like we have to total redo of the budget.
And so we can continue and move forward here. It is 6:46, so we don't run over. We just need to keep in mind what we're talking about and being visionaries moving forward within this, that we do allow possible funding for new city hall, new police station, and that we're not handcuffing ourselves, from an economical standpoint as we move forward. Committee-wise, whatever, Scott, you've seen it, you've been a member of this community for many years. It's government runs slow, so and we know this. So this is probably why it's wise for us to, like we did before, we was looking for sites and possibilities and funding and what that looks like, and TIF or no TIF. We need to do this like yesterday. So I highly advise us to form that. It doesn't have to be necessarily a committee of whole. It wasn't like that. We had like 2 or 3 council members and members of our staff here at City Hall. But this is the ideal time. But also know that when we're doing this tax levy, to ensure that we have funds available so we can move forward with that. And if we have to supplement, we have to be creative. Well, there's ways to do so.
We cannot use TIF for a municipal building. We can, however, use sales option tax that we get approximately just shy of $1 million a year. So we can go through some of that. Unfortunately, we may have to get into TIFing more projects unless they change that. For instance,
revenue.
Well, for instance, LeClaire Road is available for federal funding. 80-20 match, 70-30 match. Some of those things we may have to pursue a little harder. But, there's work that has to be done. No one's disputing that. But, and through that process, we probably really need to evaluate what funds are coming out of the sales option tax and what they're funding. Are they necessary? We need that for development of other things, because we have a lot of flexibility with those dollars and we don't have with other funds. So it's going to be a complicated matrix that we're going to have to work our way through. But we can do it. It's just going to be trying to guess what the future is going to bring for us.
You just wanted to approve of the agenda. I know.
Oh,
And then
yeah. We talked about how the agenda was changed since they weren't here, but we didn't approve the change.
So moved.
All right,
Second.
motion by Dr. second by Campbell. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, so then back to what we're talking about, because there's still a few more things on page 2 to discuss. It's all these good things you guys talk about that we do need to, and we may need to have some extra meetings to talk about all these other things instead of just kicking the can down the road on all these things. They're good items to talk, a lot of discussion, see if there's grants, all that. But the thing in front of us right now, because the city has a deadline with the state, is the max levy rate, which I think the 8.11 is not out of line with all the things that we know we have coming at us in the future.
And I would totally agree. I think that's a minimal increase when you look at the numbers that we have. I think my house would be maybe an extra $60 a year, I think is what I have to pay in taxes.
That's only because you get the plus 65 credit.
Wait till you get there then, Brian.
So you got the senior discount. Oh.
I had to say that. Quite all right. And I will say, I haven't, since the article came out in the paper last time, and I've had numerous people talk to me and say they don't have a problem with the minimal increase. And so I think that there are people out there that feel that way.
Is there direction from the council on any adjustments to be made prior to the March 3rd meeting, or are we bringing back the same budget numbers, the same budget proposal for tonight to the next meeting with the rest of the council?
It's whether we consider the wages at 3%. That'd be one option. I really would like to see 80 or 100,000 on the GRF go to equipment replacement. You know, in those moves, the dump truck coming out of equipment replacement and moving the funds, how we're going to fund that over to equipment replacement, same way with squad cars. That way we get all of our new assets in a specific area within the budget.
And 3% on wage?
Well, 3%, add another 9,000 to the general revenue fund that you can put in your contingency fund. So I'm not saying strip it all the way out of the budget. I'm just saying put it 3% wage. If it was 2.9% or 2.5, whoever's number you want to use, I mean, we can justify that because that is the cost of living.
I'm still okay with 3.5, but as you have sort of eloquently stated several times, I'm new at this, so I really can't argue with you, but I'm still okay with 3.5.
Would you guys ever guess we used to be neighbors?
Okay, so 80 to 100,000 to equipment replace out of the general fund and decrease from 3.5% to 3% on the wage lines for the March 3rd meeting.
And the squad cars and dump truck over to equipment replacement? Instead of taking you'll still have to take fund out of the.
It'll just transfer over. I'll just move I'll move the lines over to equipment replacement.
Well, Frank, every time we go to spend money out of the sales option, I'm gonna ask why.
No, I hope so. You mentioned, and Dan had a pretty good explanation last meeting about the fire department stuff. Maybe we should look at only putting 50,000 in the equipment replacement and see if we can put 40 for the fire department.
Why put the balance of the 40 in the general fund contingency? Find a place for it there, because then we can always amend the budget at the end of the year if we have to and put it over to equipment replacement.
Well, that's what happened in that one budget. It was put there, but it wasn't ever, so it went back, right?
If it's not a planned expenditure, it just rolls over into our reserves. I mean, technically by the state definition for how we're supposed to do our budget is if there's an expenditure listed in there, it should be allocated to an expenditure. If it's just going to roll over to reserves, we might as well put it in a line that naturally rolls over to reserves instead of stating an expenditure in the fire department fund.
Gives more flexibility that way. At least we're keeping that in mind. I believe it's important. So,
Well, that's planning for the future. Whether we actually do it or not
precisely.
is yet to be determined. If it's going to be this proposed budget year or 10 years from now, but at least
Right.
we'd be planning for it.
Okay. Any other recommendations for administration?
I make a motion for adjournment.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion by Dockery, second by Blackwell to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nays, adjourned at 6:58.